Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Ricotta Pie. That's right, while this rustic Italian dessert may not be as sweet or rich or ginormous as the kind of cheesecake that might be produced in a factory, it's delicious in its own right and incredibly easy to make. Unless, of course, you decide to do a cannoli-inspired version and make your own special crust that's kind of a hybrid between a cookie and a pie crust, which is what I did. But even with that, it was still pretty simple, and here's how it went down. So the first thing I did was make my crust, and I'm going to do that right in my food processor, and it's going to start with some flour, just all-purpose flour. We're also going to add a little bit of salt, a touch of sugar, just white sugar, a little bit of baking powder. No, not baking soda. That's different. Baking powder. I'm also going to crack in an egg, and because, as I mentioned, I am doing a cannoli-inspired pie, I'm going to add a little touch of cinnamon. We're also going to need some cold butter, and then before we move on to the always popular pulsing on and off step, I'm going to toss in a splash of Marsala wine. And of course, wine is a very typical ingredient in a cannoli shell. And even though the texture is going to be totally different, we can still kind of go for those flavors. And at that point, we can go ahead and pulse this on and off for about a half a minute. Oh, by the way, if I wasn't filming a video, I would have totally stopped and scraped down that egg and cinnamon from the side. But I was. But anyway, we're going to pulse that on and off. Mostly what we're trying to do here is cut that butter into the dry ingredients. So we're going to pulse it on and off until it kind of looks like this. All right, it should be pretty coarse looking. All those little pieces are actually pieces of butter. And then the final step here, we're going to drip in just enough ice water to make this come together into a dough. So we're going to add a little ice water, and we're going to pulse it on and off until it just comes together. And when that happens, it's going to look like this. And I know what you're thinking. Shouldn't it come together in a dough ball? No, that would be overmixed. Because what we're going to do at this point is dump that onto a floured work surface and form this into a ball of dough with our hands. Okay, if you kept mixing it in the food processor until this happened, it might get overmixed, and your crust could be a little tougher than you want. So best to stop too soon and finish with your hands. And once that dough does come together, we're simply going to press it into a disc, and then we want to wrap that in plastic and chill it very thoroughly before we try to make the pie. It is critical that this dough is cold before you work with it. And did I wait? Of course not. So I didn't wait, but you really should. It is much easier to work with. So let your dough chill thoroughly, at which point you're going to dust it with flour and roll it out to about 1/8 of an inch thick. And by the way, on the blog post, I'm going to give you all your different options for crusts here. And believe it or not, you can even skip this step. But like I said, we'll cover that on the blog. And once we have that rolled out, we're going to transfer that into your standard glass 9-inch pie dish. And really the easiest and safest way to do that would just be to roll your dough over your rolling pin like this. Just roll it back, place your pie dish down, and just roll it back over. So easy. And once that dough's been placed in your pie dish, we're going to take a knife and go around the outside, around the outside, around the outside, trimming off all the extra dough. And you might be thinking, why didn't you just use less ingredients for the pie crust? Because 1 egg. So because I was using 1 egg, I didn't want to use less dry ingredients. The proportions would have been off. The good news is you can reuse this dough. So you can wad that up and use it again. But anyway, we're going to trim that off. And then as usual, I want to give a nice little design around the edge of the crust. And of course, I'm using the technique my mother Pauline taught me, simply pushing 1 finger into 2 fingers. Hey, who said crimping ain't easy? Crimping is totally easy. And once that's been done, we're going to take a fork and dock the dough, which means just take the fork and prick it all over. This is going to help it prevent from puffing up when we blind bake it, which is the next step. So once that's been docked, I'm going to add a circle of parchment paper, on top of which we're going to add our baking weights. And if you don't have these, which you probably don't, you can simply use dried beans. They work great. So we'll toss those in, we'll spread those around, and then we're going to go ahead and blind bake, as it's called, this pie in a 400-degree oven for 15 minutes. And after 15 minutes, we're going to pull it out. We'll let it cool for a few minutes. We're going to carefully remove those baking weights. And then all we need to do is let that sit, continuing to cool, while we make our ricotta filling, which is ridiculously easy. So in a mixing bowl, I'm going to add the star of the show, some beautiful fresh ricotta cheese, also sometimes referred to as ricotta. It's a Jersey thing. And then in addition to our beautiful cheese, we're going to add some eggs, 4 whole eggs, plus 2 yolks. We're also going to need some pure vanilla extract and a healthy dose of it, as well as some freshly grated orange and lemon zest. And of course, you could just use one or the other or neither. It's up to you. You're the one responsible for making sure your ricotta pie is super fly. So you make the call. I'm going to use both. And then last and certainly least, we need some sugar, but not that much. I'm only using about 1/3 cup. And at that point, we can take a whisk and mix this until it's completely smooth. And don't worry, when you first start mixing, it's going to look terrible. It'll look all separated and broken, and you'll think something went wrong, and you'll be cursing my name, which, by the way, is highly inappropriate. But then all of a sudden, it will start coming together, and will look all gorgeous like this. And that is pretty much it for the filling. And at that point, let's go ahead and transfer that into our prepared pie shell. And if you want, you could bake it just like this, but as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to do kind of a cannoli-inspired pie. So I decided to add some chopped candied orange zest and chocolate. And I could have just mixed that right into the batter, but I'm always afraid of this stuff sinking to the bottom. Plus, by scattering it like this first, you can get a really great idea of how much is going to be in each bite. So I scattered that over, and then so it mixes in without sinking, I'm going to take the tip of my knife and just kind of poke that stuff down, kind of stir it in with the tip of the knife, and I think that allows for those ingredients, especially the chocolate, to be more suspended in the batter than, like I said, just sink to the bottom. But whatever, you could probably just mix it in. And then once I did that, I decided to scatter a few more over the top so it would look nice after it baked, which basically ended up not being the case. But that's okay. You got to take chances in life. But anyway, I threw on a few more chips, and at that point it's ready for the oven. So we're going to place that into the center of a 350-degree oven for 45 minutes, or until it looks like this and is just barely set. And while it should be perfect after 45 minutes, really the best way is to check with a thermometer. We want to shoot for about 160 internal temp, and if you get to and stop at that temperature, the texture of your pie should be beautifully creamy and luxurious. And as it cools, you'll kind of see it sink down a little. Don't be alarmed, totally normal. And at that point, our ricotta pie is ready to not eat. You really do want to chill this completely before serving. So I refrigerated mine for a few hours before I sliced it. And then again, keeping with the cannoli theme, I decided to garnish with a little bit of chopped pistachio. Oops, I think that was a shell. Let me take that off. I'm not trying to get sued. Again. And besides the pistachio, I also decided to do a little extra candied orange zest, moistened with a little bit of simple syrup, kind of scattered here and there, which I thought looked kind of nice. But anyway, that's it. Ricotta pie. So simple, so easy, and a really delicious change of pace from your more traditional American-style cheesecakes. So this is definitely a lot lighter approach. And as I mentioned, my strange hybrid crust is optional. I thought it was good, but this pie is also delicious with no crust or a graham cracker crust. And no matter what kind of crust you use, it is just one of those simple dessert recipes everybody should know. Okay? So I really do hope you give this a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.